Hello, my dears. I trust you're okay. This is my first vlog for August. It's August the 4th, 2020, and I got to make a special announcement. I tore away a page on my desk diary to find it's Dorium on the 4th of August. So I'm going to announce and declare that from now on, the 4th of August is Dorium Day. So that's very exciting. Thank you all for your messages this week. There's some things that have got people in a bit of a tiz, and there are other things that people just want clarification on. So first of all, Isabel, Terry, Eric, Gordon, Daisy, and another Elizabeth, you want clarification on what is meant by our furlough scheme. So we're living in extraordinary times, and the term furlough comes from a Dutch word which means, and I've looked this up, means leave of employees due to special needs. In other words, for whatever the circumstances are, so at this current time, people have said that they don't need to go to work, but they will be paid something, and officially it's whatever is agreed between you and your employer. But on this occasion, the government announced that you would get 80% of whatever salary you were on. All very exciting, but then how does it actually work in practice? And this is where I've had to make notes, because it is indeed very confusing. But the bottom line, and this is from, I've made notes from the government website. So I'm not saying that this is sacrosanct, but I've taken notes from what I would consider to be the obvious place to go to. So it means employees cannot do any work that, 1, makes money for the organisation, or 2, provides a service for the organisation. So if your employer has sent you home, or under the furlough scheme, that's it. You get 80% of your salary and you stay at home. If your employer then asks you to do some work, then you should be, according to the rules here, on 100% of your salary, but the employer will claim back 80%. There are some slight exceptions, as always, just to confuse us all, but here goes. An employee who is furloughed can take part in any training on offer. Makes sense? Very good. The employee can volunteer for another employer or organisation, provided it's not a competitor. Okay. But it also says that an employee who is furloughed can then work for another employer, provided not a competitor with your employer. Now, to me, that seems a little odd, in that you could be furloughed, and the government is paying the 80% for that, and then you take up another job, and the government will be contributing to that cost too. I could have got it wrong, and anybody can come back to me and say, no, you got it wrong, Simon. Go back to your studies. But what is clear is that all employee rights are kept in place, including your holiday entitlement. Well, I hope that clears up the furlough thing. I've had to read it and read it and read it again, because it is very puzzling indeed. So, the other thing that's been getting a few people's dander up is the announcement of recent people being appointed to the House of Lords. And of course they're jumping up and down and saying it's cronyism and whatever. I mean, after all, one of the candidates is the Prime Minister's brother. Okay, let's take a deep breath. The House of Lords is an upper chamber which in theory and in practice is a scrutinising chamber. The House of Commons very often rushes through bills, laws and legislation that's not, one, actually very clear, and two, not very well written. So the main job of the House of Lords is to scrutinise these things and to try and put in some form of clarification. They can also suggest amendments, and it's called sending the bill back to the House of Commons to either tick an amendment or not, whichever is their desire. The cry that the second chamber should also be an elected chamber, I'm a little hesitant about, on the grounds that if the second chamber is elected, then they'll have more power and there would be more conflict between the Commons and the House of Lords if the House of Lords is elected. My concern also is that our second chamber is definitely made up of a lot of people who are experts in their field and have a lot of understanding and far more knowledge about a certain subject than any of us would imagine. And these sort of people I can't personally see as people who will be happy to go on the hustings and be, quote, politically minded. They're just people who've got extensive knowledge that is required, regardless of what the media or anybody else will suggest. And we need those sort of people. But Lord Winston, for example, I can't see him getting up on a soapbox or even desiring to. So we have to be careful what we suggest. I mean, there are 10 Lords a-leaping, isn't it, in the Christmas song and the 12 Days of Christmas, which suggests they're all a bit balmy. Yes, a lot of people in the House of Lords could be considered eccentric, but then I'm considered eccentric, but it's just the way they are. There are criticisms that you see images of peers in the House of Lords sleeping on the benches. I suggest that there are days where it's actually very, very warm, both in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And that's why sometimes peers are looked to be dozing off, where in fact they are listening intently and then they vote. What else can I say about the House of Lords? No, it's don't get me wrong, there is always room for improvement. There is always room to tweak things and make them easier. I would suggest you don't necessarily need 800 people in the House of Lords, and people cry, but they're paid £300 a day, blah, blah, blah. No, they're paid £300 expenses, as a lot of the Lords live well outside of London, so when they do come, they have to get accommodation, and as you are probably aware, in London, yeah, 300 quid doesn't cover much expenses-wise. I think that's it, really. Ian Botham, a cricketer. Some people say, well, why should he be in the House of Lords? It's because he's not just a cricketer. In his time, he's done a lot of work for charities, but also he's specialised in other fields. Flo Benjamin is another example. Some people would say, oh, well, she was just an actress who was in play school. No, she's far, far more than that. She has specialised in developing education for young children and follows it through quite dramatically and has done so for 30 or 40 years. So she deserves to be in the House of Lords because her knowledge is required. And this is what we forget. Some MPs will cry foul if they're criticised for something, and then they say, but we relied on our experts. So, for example, the current COVID-19 situation, you'll hear the government of the day is information based on what the scientists tell us. That's because they're cowards and they don't want to take responsibility themselves. Whereas in the House of Lords, you have the experts at hand who can tell you there and then. And I do recommend to everyone, if you get a chance, just watch the actual process that goes on in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Listen in to some of the scrutiny panels, and you'll get a better idea of how everything works. It's not all just PMQs, which I must admit is the comedy show of the week. But so there we go. That's what I say. As to who goes there, I don't really care, as long as they can do their job and they do it well. And as for the other things that people talk about, we mustn't allow your chip in the shoulder to put us into danger. Well, until we speak again, au revoir.